Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Marcy Charm, and I am honored to welcome you to this very meaningful program in commemoration of Kristallnacht. The Holocaust Council of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West is proud to present the author, Nechama Birnbaum, whose book, The Redhead of Auschwitz, chronicles the survival and life of her grandmother, Rosie, a Holocaust survivor. Like Nechama, I too am the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. And like Rosie, my paternal grandmother survived Auschwitz as a teenager. My grandmother went on to live a beautiful life surrounded by her loving husband, 3 sons, 6 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren. Her bravery, resilience, cleverness, and in many instances, luck were apparent in nearly all the Holocaust stories she shared with us throughout her life. As many of you know, on November 9th through 10th, 1938, Nazi leaders unleashed a series of pogroms against the Jews of Germany. This event came to be called Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass, because of the shattered glass that littered the streets after the vandalism and destruction of Jewish-owned businesses, synagogues, schools, and homes. At least 96 Jews were killed and hundreds more injured. More than 1,300 synagogues were burned, almost 7,500 Jewish businesses destroyed, and 30,000 Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Many say this premeditated act was the turning point in German policy regarding the Jews and is considered the beginning of the Holocaust. My maternal grandfather was 17 when he experienced this terrifying ordeal. After being woken in the middle of the night by SS guards, he and his father were arrested and taken to the concentration camp Dachau, which at the time was the most feared camp in Germany. Unlike my grandmother, who spoke of her time during the war often, my grandfather found it too emotional to talk about and did not speak of his experiences until he was 67 years old at a program commemorating the 50th anniversary of Kristallnacht. This past January, I was fortunate enough to participate in 3G New York's program for grandchildren of Holocaust survivors called We Do, which is short for We Educate, co-sponsored by the Holocaust Council of Greater Metro West. As a 3rd-generation survivor, or 3G, I was given the tools to effectively weave my grandmother's story of survival into a comprehensive presentation that I can share in schools, synagogues, and other forums to educate others about the perils of intolerance. I look forward to doing the same for my grandfather's Kristallnacht story as well. It is especially important in today's climate with the alarming rise of anti-Semitism, both here at home in the United States and abroad, to recall, reflect, and remember the atrocities of not only the Holocaust itself, but of the events that led to the rise of the Nazi Party. Understanding the political and social atmosphere in the 1930s and 1940s that allowed such malice to take hold is crucial in understanding and combating today's prejudices. Sadly, the sobering anti-Semitic acts we have seen in recent years, months, and even just over a week ago here in New Jersey are reminiscent of events that occurred nearly 90 years ago. If you have had the privilege of speaking with or listening to a survivor, most share the same message, their sincerest hope that no one shall ever bear witness to something as evil as the Holocaust again. By remembering and honoring the stories of our loved ones who lived through the worst of humanity, we are doing our part to ensure that hate doesn't go unchecked and that the past doesn't repeat itself. We are so fortunate to have Elise Shane Brown, Director of Holocaust Education for the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West, as our advocate for guaranteeing that Holocaust education is taught broadly in schools throughout New Jersey. She matches 3Gs like me, who are the last living link to survivors, with speaking opportunities, and we are so grateful for her support and dedication to ensuring future generations get as close to a firsthand account of the Holocaust as possible. I'd like to turn the presentation over to her at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcy, for that wonderful introduction and for all of the wonderful thoughts and images on Kristallnacht. We know how important it was, and even though we are commemorating it a week after, we still think about and remember all those atrocities. And those, for also a little plug, for those of you that might be in communities that are looking for a speaker, Marcy does a beautiful job of sharing her story. And so please reach out to me. We would love to have her come and speak to your community. Before we introduce our wonderful speaker, Nechama Birnbaum, tonight, I wanted to just take a moment to recognize that we are remembering the 6 million Jews and 6 million others that did perish in the Holocaust, that did not survive from Kristallnacht a little bit before and certainly on until 1945. So we are going to be thinking about them this evening as we hear this incredible story of survival. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Nechama Birnbaum to tell and share her grandmother's story and how she's been able to get her grandmother's message so beautifully out to the entire world, really. So go ahead, Nechama. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat because we will have a chance to get to them. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is, I believe it's my third time speaking since my grandmother passed away. So excuse me if I get a little emotional. And it is such an honor to be here and such an honor that you are all here. I want to thank Greater Metro West. They worked incredibly hard on this and they do amazing work. So thank you. My name is Nechama Birnbaum. And I wrote this book, The Redhead of Auschwitz, which is my grandmother's story. And it was always my grandmother's dream and my dream too, to get her story out in the world. And a lot of people told me that I wasn't going to be able to do it, especially when I was trying to get it published. After I spent 5 years writing it, I was trying to get it published, and hundreds of people told me that this is never going to happen. I got countless rejections from literary agents and publishing companies. And they said, the story is great, but Holocaust books don't sell anymore. And this is not going to happen. You need to have like a take on it, something different. This book is not going to happen. And I really almost listened to them. But then I remembered who I was writing about. And I said, I can't listen to them because of who I was writing about. So allow me to tell you a bit about my grandmother, and you'll understand really quickly why I couldn't listen to them. My grandmother, Rosie, was born in Krasna, which was a little mountain town. She always used to say a beautiful mountain town wrapped by a stream, really like a village, she called it, where they went to the market and they had one school and one church and one synagogue. And it was a beautiful town. It was in Romania. It was on the border of Romania. So sometimes it was Hungary, sometimes it was Romania. They considered themselves Romanian, and she loved her town. But one thing that she didn't love about her town was that being a redhead, which she was in her town, was not only considered ugly, which it was actually considered a curse. She told me she used to walk in the market and she had these Romanian women spit in her face because they thought that the devil lived in her hair. They're very superstitious. And they thought the devil lived in her hair, and they would spit to remove the devil from her hair. And everybody besides her, these women, everybody all around her, she was made fun of for her red hair. And she was always told she was ugly because of her hair. And her mother wanted her to fit in. So her mother used to get nut oils. And she remembers sitting in the garden, and she had her eyes closed the whole time because there was nut oils dripping down her face. Her mother was massaging nut oils in her hair, trying to dye her hair blonde. And she told me as her eyes were closed, she would just be praying the whole time, please don't work, please don't work, please don't work. And then she would open her eyes when her mother finished, and she went to the mirror, and she would just be like waiting, like, oh my goodness, I hope it's not blonde. I hope it's still red. And she would look in the mirror. And of course, it was as bright red as ever, because nut oils are never going to dye anybody's hair anything, despite her mother's wishful thinking. And she looked at her red hair and she said, phew, thank goodness. And she told me she looked at herself in the mirror and she used to tell herself, you are so beautiful. And she didn't care what anybody else said about her, what anyone else. They could spit in her face, they can tell her she's ugly. She said, I know I'm beautiful, and that's all that matters. But to help matters a little bit, she also knew in America, the movie stars had red hair, and that was something unheard of. And she always dreamed about moving to America, where nobody would dare call her ugly there. And she did move to America, but the way that she had to get there is a way that she would wish on no one. She was 18 years old, had a regular day, regular life. There was no, we are commemorating Kristallnacht, but there wasn't information readily available to them. They didn't even know about that. They had no idea anything that was going on in the world. It was 1944, a regular day. And from one moment to the next, they were pulled from their houses and taken to the ghetto. And from the ghetto, 3 weeks in, she was taken to Auschwitz on the cattle cars. And one of the first things that happened to her when she got to Auschwitz was that her red hair, which she was so proud of, despite what everybody said, was shaven. And there was a little prisoner woman who came to her and had a shaver in her hand. And the woman was singing, little girls with blonde braids, little boys with black curls. What was, it is no more. It went away in that time, in that hour. And the woman took the shaver and shaved all of her hair off. And there was a glass, like slab of glass on the floor. And she saw her reflection in the glass. And she realized then that nobody, not her superstitious town, not her mother, and not even Hitler, nobody was going to take that redhead out of her spirit. And she decided she's going to survive, and she continued to believe in herself. And the next morning, she was working. What they have to do is there was a huge boulder, and they had a little tiny hammers, and they had to make little stones out of the big boulders. And to fully appreciate this story, I need to give you a little bit of background about the ghetto where she was coming from. It wasn't just a ghetto where they were stuck together with a bunch of people in a house, in a room. She was in a ghetto with a brickyard. There was no shelter, no food, and no shelter. What they did was they had their clothing. They were able to each bring a suitcase of food and clothing. They would wrap their clothing on top of sticks from the ground and make themselves like a little tent to sleep in. And every time, my grandmother said the Hungarian soldiers were worse to them than the Nazis, just to get an idea of how horrible that can be. They were really, really tortured there. Every time they would build themselves a tent, the soldiers would come and knock the tent down and into the mud and say, you can't stay here. You have to build it somewhere else. And they would just be building their tents every night over and over again just to get a little bit of sleep. And they were working from morning till night. By the time 3 weeks later she got to Auschwitz, they called her a Musselman, which was their slang for skeleton. She was a skeleton already. And she also told me that all of her friends were tall and broad growing up, and she was always very petite. She was a tiny person. So she was tiny, and she's working at this boulder, and it's 100 degrees outside. She's sweating, starving, just had the most horrific month of her life. And at one point, the SS left, and they were all left there. All the girls were left there by the boulder, and they realized that she was with all of her childhood friends. They were all together. And one of her childhood friends said, we're going to heaven from here. And they knew because they had the smoke on top of them. And the Nazis had told them, you see that smoke? That's your mothers, your fathers, your sisters, your brothers, your children, your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, everyone you knew and loved. That's all that's left of them. And you're going to be next there. That was and it was just bellowing on top of their heads. And this was the scene that she was in. And her friend said, it's okay, because anyone who dies just for being Jewish, we didn't do anything wrong. We're like, we didn't do anything. We're just dying for being Jewish. We're going straight to heaven. We're going to heaven from here. And she turned to her friends and she said, you can go to heaven if you want. I'm not going to heaven from here. I'm going home from here. And her friend said, no, you're not going home. That's not, like, you have to be in reality. Look where you are. Look at what happened to us. It's okay. We lived our lives 18 years, and this is the way they had to think, but we lived our lives, and we're going to heaven from here, and we're going to be okay. We're going to have heaven. And she looked at her friends and she said, I'm going home from here. We'll see about heaven later. Now I'm not going there though. I'm going home. And they said, you're going to heaven from here. Come on, be in reality. So don't tell me where I'm going. I'm going home from here. And she one time imitated for me, like the look on her friend's face. They were just like shaking their heads like, oh, this poor girl. She lost it. She thinks she's going home from here. But she was the only one of her friends to go home. And she never saw any of her friends again. And throughout the book, I can keep you here all night if you want, but I won't. Throughout the book, there's just so many stories that illustrate this grit and this determination. And obviously, it wasn't only the determination that got her through, because there was miracles upon miracles upon miracles that she lived and she was meant to live, but she had that fight for life and that determination to go home and that fierce redhead spirit, and that truly brought her home. One of my favorite stories is the story where she got her tattoo. She got her numbers tattooed on her arms. And I'll never forget the way she told us the story, and which was the way that she told us, honestly, most of her stories is casual of ways, like, oh yeah, this happened. And we were just like, but this is how she told us this story of how she got her tattoo. It was a Friday night. We walked over, my mother, and she was I don't know how it came up, but she just looked at she was looking at her arm and she's like, look how neat my numbers are. And we were like, really? Like, neat? Like, what do you mean? She's like, oh, you got to hear this story. I was online to get the tattoo, and I saw the tattooist was writing very, very sloppy numbers. And the tattooist on the line over, I didn't know why they were doing this, but I saw the tattooist on the line over was writing very small, neat, pretty numbers. So I really quickly ran out of my line, ran to the other line, and I got myself neat numbers. I'm like, look, they're really nice. They're neat, right? And my grandmother was always very into her appearances, and she worked in fashion for years. You've never seen her go out not looking just put together and beautiful. She used to iron her own silk blouses, and I would beg her, Bobby, let me take it to the dry cleaners for you. No, nobody could iron them the way that I could iron them. And she had her red lipstick on and her wigs done to perfection, even when she got her orthopedic shoes, because she needed her comfier shoes. She brought her shoes to the shoemaker and got him to put on a black velvet bow on them with a black diamond in the middle. And they looked really good. Like, I would wear those shoes. If I would go, sometimes I went over and I wasn't wearing any makeup, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going out to eat tonight or something. She's like, oh, but do something for your face before you go. She was very into her appearances. And so when she told us the story, we started laughing and we said, Bobby, we know you're vain, but that vein, you were in Auschwitz. People were dying all around you. You were covered in lice. You had an infested uniform on. You had no hair. You were skinny. You were working from night to day. You cared about what the numbers of your arm looked like. And she looked at me, and I'll never forget that like smile she gave me. She said, it wasn't vanity. I knew I was going home. And I don't want sloppy numbers on my arm for the rest of my life. I'm going home from here. And it still matters what's going to be on me, because I'm not giving up. And she would look at those numbers throughout her time, and she would realize to herself, they would be a reminder, I'm going home from here. I'm going home from here. I'm going home from here. I still care, and it still matters. And every time I put that video on TikTok or Instagram, it gets like millions, 10 million views, because people are so inspired by that story of how much she believed in her future and herself, that when they were putting numbers to see how many people died, they were putting a number on her to keep track of her death. And she was like, I'm going to make sure that number looks good, because I'm not dying here. So it's going to be with me for a while. And then when she was finally liberated, she wasn't in Auschwitz anymore. She went from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen, and then she was in a ammunition factory, and then she was on a death march for 3 weeks. And then she got to Theresienstadt. And in Theresienstadt, she told me that they put her in an underground bunker. And she really felt like at that point she was finished. She was on a death march for no food and no water for days and days and days, just walking. And she felt like she was going into her grave when she was put into the bunker. That's how she described it to me. They were really underground, and they were just laying there for 10 days. And she said they were so forlorn already. They're laying there in that bunker, and she was just like, they couldn't even think anymore. And then all of a sudden one day, somebody came and opened up the door and said, "Girls, don't you know you're free? The war is over. You're free." And they couldn't believe it. And they got out of the bunker. And can you play the video, please? I have a video to show of the first thing that she saw. Thank you. And the next one, please.
I see trees are green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Thank you. So the first thing that she saw when she climbed out of that bunker were wildflowers. And she said she felt like she was coming out of her grave, and all she saw for all her eyes could see was just beautiful, beautiful colors of wildflowers all over. And she said she felt like God was telling her, "You're going home. There's a life yet for you, and there's going to be beauty in this world that you didn't think could exist anymore. And here you did it. You're going home. There's a life yet." And that's all she saw were those wildflowers. She came out of that bunker, what she called her grave, on May 8th, 1945. And on May 8th, 2022, to the day, 77 years later exactly, she was finally laid to rest. And she did go home, and she had a lifetime more of years. And then she fulfilled her promise to herself of that she's going to live and she's going to go home. And after, obviously the whole story, she went home, she had 4 children, and then she was pregnant with her 5th child. And the doctor told her it was a very complicated pregnancy. And the doctor told her, "You know, if you have this baby, I'll eat my hat." And she turned to him in her trademark redhead stubbornness, and she said, "Doctor, you better start chewing." And she put herself into bed. And a few months later, she had a beautiful redheaded baby girl. And that little girl grew up and had 9 children of her own, the 3rd of which is me. And when I was 18 years old, my father took us to visit Eastern Europe, where we came from, and also we went to Auschwitz. And I was 18 years old, the same age as my grandmother, when she stood there and told her friends, "I'm going home from here." And they said they were just shaking their head at this poor delusional girl. And look, here she is. I'm coming back as her 18-year-old granddaughter. And she did go home, and she did everything that she promised that she would do. And so when people told me, "Oh, you're never going to be able to get her story published, and nobody, Holocaust books are not going to be read anymore," I really almost listened to them. And then I realized who I was writing about. And I said, there's no way that I can take this stubborn, determined woman who I come from and not let her story get out there if that's what she wants. And I have to believe in myself more, because my grandmother taught me so many things, but two things that I'm trying most to incorporate into my life and to emulate is, number one, believe in yourself, no matter how many people spit in your face. And it was scary for me to put the book out there. It's still scary for me. I worked so hard on it, and I was scared. Did I do a good job? And to put her story out there, she was my hero, but I didn't know if other people would connect to her. And she taught me, believe in yourself. Do you do you, no matter what other people say. And also, number two, do what you want and do what you believe is right, no matter how many people tell you that you can't. And I believe everybody has something that they want to do to contribute to this world. And there's always going to be people that tell you that you can't do it. But if you would ask my grandmother, she would tell you to do it anyway. The book came out in almost exactly a year from a year ago, November 28th. I found an amazing publisher, Amsterdam Publishers, who she only does Holocaust stories, true Holocaust stories. And she's a small publisher. So she told me that, not a lot of copies, not a lot of people are going to read it. And the hard copy, I remember like discussing something about it. Oh, I didn't like how something looked. And she said, don't worry, only your family and friends are going to buy the hard copy. That's not really of concern. And I don't know the exact number, but I think we're over 50,000 copies sold. And my grandmother got hundreds of letters from people who read her story and said how much it inspired them. And more importantly, my grandmother got to see her life's dream come true at 95 years old. She held up that book and she was so excited about it. And she was so passionate to tell her story. And she was so happy that she was able to see it come true. And I've gotten so many people of just saying, like, I'm going through such a hard time now, and your grandmother gives me hope that things are going to be okay. Things are going to get better. And I want to leave you with a message from her, because this is who it's all really about. And this is the reason why she told her story, and why I think it's so important to keep telling these survivor stories and never forgetting, because it's a message that we need more than ever now. So if you can play the last video, please.
It's everywhere is people. It's not what color you are or what religion you are. And don't want to push one down and one up and one down and one up. Every person is a person.
So that was her message, and that was the reason why she wanted to share her story. And thank you for listening to a bit about her story. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much. That was just wonderful, and also so wonderful to see your grandmother and to see those videos. I know that I have been following since a year ago, or you were a little over that, right, when you started, because I heard right away and I knew immediately, Nechama, that we had to have you come to our community and speak.
Thank you.
We're still, working out virtual, and you're local, but not so local, but we really do hope to welcome you in person someday soon, and be able to have you come here to New Jersey, to our community, and meet with you. So thank you so much for coming. We do have a bunch of questions.
Thank you.
We do have a bunch of questions coming in, and I know we wanted this to be interactive. So I'm going to start by saying the first question is, we were all mesmerized by your use of social media and how you sort of worked backwards, putting the story out there on social media, on TikTok and on Instagram and things to start. And so then to get the book published. Was this scary for you, for your grandmother? I mean, I can't imagine what she was thinking as you were videoing her and doing all of these things. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
So my grandmother loved it. I remember we have a funny video of like my brother-in-law and sister one time like took out the phone to take a selfie with her. But every time a phone came out, she thought she was on Instagram. So she was like, everybody, you need to start loving each other more. And they were like, Bobby, we just want to take a selfie with you. Just smile. She loved it. I mean, it was a lot of work for her, I think, but she loved it, and she had such a really show personality. She had such a love for people, and she was great on it. She loved the Instagram. Yeah, I didn't want to start the Instagram at all. I was never into that. But when my publisher said that they don't really have a budget for advertising, marketing, and publicity, so I was like, well, I guess I'll do it myself then. And it really took off.
Wonderful. And it has been so special, and it's so wonderful to keep following. So everybody that isn't following now, please go and follow Nechama. They're amazing, incredible posts that she continues to do. A question that's coming in: how were you able to collect the stories, and did you videotape your grandmother or do a lot of research? What was the timeline of how you put this all together?
Yeah, so that really was my brother-in-law, Daniel Machlis. He did the whole, first of all, getting the product off the ground. He was amazing. He kept just saying, we got to do this, we got to do this. And he went to her he has, if you read the book, he has a letter in it, how he used to go to her for 2 years and video all of her from beginning to end, her saying her whole story. We have everything on video of her saying her story. And he would upload that, and then I would watch those videos. So he really has everything, in a place where you can always hear it from her mouth. And then I used to go to Yad Vashem. I was living in Israel at that time. I used to go to the Yad Vashem library and fact check everything that she was saying, and also try to figure out the timings and the dates, and a lot of things I kept talking to the librarian, I have to fact check this and fact check that. And the librarian one time told me, you have to stop. I know it's very hard to believe these stories that your grandmother's telling you, but you have the best source of information. This is a first-hand account, and you don't need to fact check that much. She knows what she's saying. This is the best source of information. But I did, make sure everything that she was saying was accurate, and watch other documentaries. And then there was also a lot of stories she told us, growing up in casual ways. I one time went grocery shopping with her, and there was it started raining, and I was like, "Oh, Bobby, come under the awning," and she was like, "Oh, this is nothing." And she would tell me about the time when they were outside for 7 hours on roll call when there was just a huge thunderstorm happening on top of them. So it was those ways of getting information from her.
Somebody's asking, was your grandmother able to go straight to the United States after being liberated?
No, so she was in Germany in a DP camp. Well, first she went home, and she was surprised and devastated to see that nobody was there. Nobody came back. And then she went to a DP camp in Germany, and then from there went to another DP camp in Italy, where she had my aunt. And then from there, they went to St. Paul, Minnesota, I believe, and then to Brooklyn, New York, where she lived.
Got it. So it took a little bit of time before she was able to get here. What about, people are asking about other survivors in her family? Did she have any others that were surviving? And then also asking about your grandfather. Was he a survivor, and how did they meet?
Yeah, so she survived with her younger sister, who was 17 months younger than her. And she, the way she put it was, her younger sister was smarter than her and more talented than her, and just everything better than her. But she had my grandmother had those survival instincts a little bit more, and she pushed and pushed and pushed her younger sister to survive. So much so that at the end of the war, when they were on the death march, my grandmother was ready to give up and stop walking, and she said, "I know I'm going to be shot, but I can't walk and I can't take another step." And her sister said, "Oh no, you don't. You didn't make me survive this whole horror to give up now." And her sister made her keep going. So she survived with her younger sister. They were extremely close. Her mother, she had a one other brother and her mother. her father passed away when she was 5 years old. And they on the selection line, her mother was sent to the gas chambers and her brother was sent with the sisters. But the mother got so nervous, like she was being separated from her little son. So she called him and he ran over to her side and was sent straight to the gas chambers also. So she survived only with one sister and an aunt that she was with the whole time also. And my grandfather didn't go through the camps. He got papers and he was blonde hair, blue eye, and he was able to, like, he was always in different villages and always running, but he didn't go. They met afterwards.
So do you know how they met? Someone is asking.
Yeah, I believe by her uncle. Her uncle started like a restaurant kind of thing to feed all the people that were coming home. I think he was there.
Got it. So they met after the war and came to the United States together.
Yeah.
Okay. We have another question. When do you remember your grandmother starting to tell you her story, or was there like a point in time that she started to point to it or started to share?
I don't remember a specific time. I do remember always hearing that story, like from when I was a little girl, of how like she's not going to heaven now. And that was like the story. I was just doing an interview and someone said, was it so traumatizing growing up hearing those stories? And it only got traumatizing for me when I was doing research for the book and hearing more of the details. But the story she told me personally, growing up, was they were more of her perseverance and her grit and it wasn't a victim mentality. But I remember in 5th grade doing a school project on her. And I remember like thinking, wow, like everybody else's stories are not as cool as my grandmother's. Like she was so cool. Because I'm pretty young to have a Holocaust survivor grandmother. She had my mother when she was older, so I was like the only one that was giving that history.
The next question is about religious observance. Did your grandmother stay observant or grow up observant? And if you can talk about that, about how that interacted with you writing the book and social media.
Yeah, my grandmother grew up observant and she was always observant. She had a huge love. She loved being Jewish. She loved Israel. She loved Shabbos. She would tell all of her like grandchildren, like, keep learn Torah. Like it was she loved everything about it. What was the second part of the question?
How did that, did your family then stay observant? And if so, did that affect you writing the book or going on social media and things like that?
Yeah, my family is observant. It didn't affect me. Most people, it's funny, like most people that follow aren't Jewish. And they're always like, that's like one of the like side things that I love about it is like there's so much like negative presentation about Orthodox Jews in the world, and we're like, that's a wig you're wearing, no way. And like and it's nice to show like don't believe everything that you see. Like, yeah, my grandmother and I are both observant Orthodox Jews.
That's wonderful and so incredible that it is making that mark, especially as we've talked about so much recently with a rise of anti-Semitism, unfortunately happening again. It's so nice for you to be able to share and just show that Jews are like everybody else. And that's just a wonderful thing. And the fact that you have so many followers, I don't know, I didn't check today, I meant to, but the last time I checked, it was like up to 108,000 followers. I mean, it's incredible, really just remarkable what you've been able to do, and sharing such a positive viewpoint is just wonderful and so needed in this world. Just as a side note, your mom did just leave in the message that your parents met because your grandfather rented an apartment and fed and housed survivors. So she went there because they were cousins and she knew to go there. So that's how they met. So that was also a good way, a good little tidbit, that it's also incredible that your grandfather was renting an apartment and housing other survivors when he himself
Yeah.
probably didn't have much from surviving like that. So that's just remarkable, and maybe something for you to research for your next book is
Yeah.
your grandfather's story.
A lot of people ask my grandmother how, like, they're always when I used to do like question answers on Instagram, they would say like, how did you keep going? How did you find the silver lining? And the thing that she always said was, keep thinking of how you can help people. Because if that keeps you going. And that's really what they did. They're always trying to don't focus on what happened only, but focus on how can we help, how can we give? Because then there's always something to do and always something to contribute. You can never be lacking in that department. There's always people who need, so.
That is so wonderful. And also, I think leads into our last question that you and I had kind of discussed talking about and ending with, and I know how important it is for you to share this. Do you see, I know you have two daughters, yes?
2 daughters, yeah.
2 daughters. Do you see your daughters one day sharing and retelling their great grandmother's story? Do you hope that that is something that is in their future?
Yes, I do. And they were extremely close with my grandmother. We would go over all the time, and you know, she would make them at 95 years old, 96 years old. She was making them oatmeal and making them eat, and they really loved her. And we're constantly talking about her. And I see, even like my oldest is 6 and the other one's 4, and I see a pride in the way they talk about her, because as much as I can't really tell them, you know, I don't want to tell them what she went through, but they see how strong she was, and the little bit that they know, I think that hopefully they'll be continuing to share her story.
Yes, truly making it from generation to generation. And of course, we hope that, and we hope you write another book, whether it's afterwards, or if you write something about your grandfather, or however you want to do it, because you've done such a beautiful job. And we thank you so much for being here today. Quick question. We can end on this. At what age did you realize that this was important to share?
I think it really hit me. I mean, I think even in 5th grade, I was like, wow, this is not so much the importance about sharing about the Holocaust, but more about her strength. I thought, like, she's amazing, and I want to share that. But when I went to visit Auschwitz, I realized, like, wow, this is so important to share this story. But actually, I never, because growing up, always hearing about this, I never really believed how few people know about the Holocaust. And then when I was researching for the book, it was really crazy for me to see the statistics of how few Americans know about the Holocaust. So it was more, even as I was doing it. My grandmother was much smarter than me. She knew how much it was important, and we were sort of like, Bobby, everybody knows about the Holocaust, but she was right, they don't know. So that's it, sort of evolved.
Well, we are so glad you did share this story, and we thank you so much for being here today, and for sharing with us to commemorate Kristallnacht. And before we close, we have a few words to share from Alana Schwartz, a committee member of the Holocaust Council.
Hi, everyone. Nechama, thank you so much for sharing the remarkable story of your grandmother and her family with us tonight. Thank you for putting into words so vividly both the horrors your family faced and also your grandmother's indomitable spirit. You have taken us as readers and those joining on the line tonight to places we would rather think don't exist or have not existed, but it's so important to know, to acknowledge, and understand that they did. Listening, reading the book, and listening to you tonight, we all shudder at the thought of Rosie's ordeal, and we all marvel at her will to survive. And I imagine that for you, each part of the writing process and each time you speak about the book, it is such an emotional journey. And we sincerely thank you for your willingness to share the journey with all of us. I hope you know, Nechama, that you are really making a difference every single time you share the story. Like you, I'm also the granddaughter and niece of survivors. And so when I read your book, I felt as if you were telling the story of my grandfather and his family too. And I hope you know just how much that meant to me. My grandfather actually passed in 1964. His name was Arnold. I'm named after him. And when he passed away, my mother was only 11. And so with the memories of the war still so raw and my mother being so young, we don't have that living history documented the way you were able to do with your grandmother. And so with each part of your book, I found myself looking for similarities between your family stories and mine, imagining at times with horror how anyone, let alone loved ones, were treated, but also how they came to survive and to live on. In fact, my family was also taken to Auschwitz in 1944. My grandfather lost his parents, his wife, his daughter, his sisters, and other family in the camps. But he miraculously survived along with his 3 brothers. They too, like your grandmother, worked in various armament facilities, endured death marches as the Allies were approaching, and we were subject to the same abominable treatment and conditions you described so chillingly in the book. However, from their struggles, loss, and grief, there is also the beauty of life, strength, and continuance in our family too. From the 4 surviving Gottlieb brothers, there are 8 children, 13 grandchildren, and 16 great-grandchildren so far. And so as I think about all of our stories, and I think about the history that you've brought out tonight, and I think about the world that we're in, I realize what an important and sort of concerning inflection point we are in the current world events, with increasing anti-Semitism and sort of anti-everything sentiment, and also the reality that our survivors who can attest to the realities of the Holocaust and the damage that hatred can cost, that starting to dwindle. So as a 3G or 3rd generation survivor, I feel it's so important to share the story of your book and your family, and of all of our families. And I just hope that by sharing these stories, we add a human face to the atrocities that attempted to strip away parts of humanity. We are all not just honoring our family's legacy, but hopefully helping to protect and improve society as we know it as well. As the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West with our Holocaust Council, we're committed to continuing to share all these stories and to ensure that Holocaust education remains an important part of our community. We strive to educate about the past and offer important lessons about acceptance and understanding of the diverse groups across the Metro West area. You will find us spearheading programs at our local public and private schools, hosting programs such as these, working with survivors, and communicating and working with various community leaders. Please, if anyone needs any sort of events like this, reach out to the Holocaust Council and we can help provide you with programs like this in your own communities. Nechama, thank you again from the bottom of our hearts, from all of us, for joining us tonight.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and for giving all of us some important lessons to think about and act upon. And to everyone else on the Zoom, thank you all for joining us.